Hi everyone, it's Lee here. I hope you're well. Welcome BA, IVM, LCC students. Very exciting night this evening because I'm sat with Michael Dowling, who's penciling for Marvel at the moment and has had a long career as a graphic illustrator and has undertaken many jobs as not only in independent graphic novels, but also with Vertigo, 2000 AD, and now Marvel. Hi, Michael.
Evening, Lee.
We have just done a rehearsal, so it sounds a bit odd doing this. So we are in Michael's studio at the moment, and Michael's very kindly given me some images that we're going to go through and have a look at. So I suppose my first question, and a lot of students have asked me to ask this question, is how did you first get into doing this?
Right, yeah. And this is what the first slide references. It's from a comic book that was to promote a friend's film. And it was the first comic book I did, and it was about 12 pages long. But my friend had made a 20-minute science fiction film off his own back, which, at some point I might say that getting into comics is hard, but making your own 20-minute science fiction film is really hard. But anyway, I did the storyboards for his film, which kind of gave me a feeling that this might be something that I could do. I mean, I'd been to art school, but I'd never thought much about comics. And so when he was taking his short film on the festival circuit, I said, well, look, why don't I do a little sort of 10, 12-page comic to help you promote your film? You can give it to Harvey Weinstein. He didn't. And so, I don't know, this is page 8 from that book. And it's pretty rough. It's pretty rough around the edges. I didn't really know what I was doing, but just to be able to do 10 pages or so was enough to make me feel that maybe there was something in it. Maybe I could give it a go.
But it's interesting. We've had these conversations about your early days, and you come from quite an interesting background where you did a BA course in fine art, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, at Canterbury
Christchurch, which is an odd institution, which was populated mainly by students and lecturers from UCL, Slade. And so they came from a sort of rigorous observational painting place. Ewan Uglow being the sort of most famous exponent of what they were kind of into. And that was why I went there, because that's what I was interested in, that kind of hard looking at things, and if you see the paintings, they can look a bit constipated in a way, because they're really, I mean that in a kind way, but they're really about close observation and measurement, and trying to not act as a camera necessarily, but trying to get something of your visual world onto the canvas without these kind of intermediaries of metaphysics or things like that.
I think throughout the chat, I'd like to pick up on how you deal with drawing a figure, but I think I'm interested right at the beginning was that you did paint figures, didn't you, on canvas? That's what you did.
Yeah. We had a life model in. There would be 2 long modelling poses running each term, and so there'd be a poor model stood in the same pose every Wednesday for 10, 12 weeks, and then you'd have one canvas that you kind of try and build towards something of your experience of being in that room. So it was, they kind of led us down that path of sort of hard observation. And it's an interesting road to go down. I don't know if it's if it would qualify as a universal approach to art, but it's something.
And we've had conversations before about, as a young man, you couldn't deal with the frustration of fine art painting, and you used to just smash your paintings up. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I'm very very negative about my own work. I was very it get to the point where after I'd spent about 3 months on a painting, I realised it was really no good.
Well, maybe in your eyes, but
well, that's it. I think it's that's a whole unique set of problems that are not to do with picture making. I think if you're just shoving your rolled up canvases and broken frames into the wheelie bin every Friday, it's it was a problem, and it was a lot to do with trying to kind of reconcile my strange university experience. And I think most students have to do this in a way. They have to find a rational way to take their university experience into the world of art, like either commercially or however that works, or aesthetically, like how they're going to develop as an artist after they left art school. And so I was I was struggling to think about how my weird sort of art school experience of this sort of observational painting could convey all the things that I was interested in. And predominantly I was more and more interested in cinema, although it turned out the thing that I was really interested in was storytelling.
Yeah, right, okay. So one of the things we share in common is that we spent a lot of time in the 90s in the East End of London, and I remember you telling me that you had all kinds of jobs as a cycle courier and all kinds of things. But did you think at that point, when you were making the transition between being a fine art student and to what you do now, do you think you had to kind of, I don't know, you had to do those bad jobs and those things in London just to allow that space to do this,
Yeah, I think...
Because it didn't just happen overnight, did it?
No,
you didn't get successful overnight. You had to kind of pay the bills, right?
This is it, yeah. And I did a lot of dead-end jobs. And I didn't start drawing comics until I was in my 30s. I think the idea was always there from when I was about 15, but it kind of ebbed and flowed according to where I found myself, but it definitely, I think once you've been knocked off a push bike, 4 times in a day, you start thinking, well, maybe this isn't the career for me. And I think also you become, as you get older, you become more aware of your strengths and the things that you can do, and you know yourself better, and you understand your sensibility. And I knew that, in a way, that I didn't want to make single images. If I was going to use what was probably my strength, which was making images, I didn't want to put so much weight on each image that it kind of that it overwhelmed me. I wanted each image to lead into the next one, which I think is how a lot of painters work anyway. A lot of visual artists think in sequence with their work.
Yeah.
But for me, I had to find a more literal way to do that.
And so the image we're looking at now, was that your first paid job?
No. See, we've snuck in just before.
Shall I do the next slide?
Yeah. So the next. So I had this. So I had, I think, eight pages of this comic for my friend's film ready. And I hadn't quite finished it, but there was a comic book convention in. Oh no! Okay, I've missed a beat. All right, so I think with those 8 pages, I took them down to see a family friend of sorts. it was as a guy who grew up in my town. He's a comic book artist. Well, I never knew when I didn't know when I was a kid. He was a few years older than me, but his dad worked with my dad, and so when I had these eight pages and was feeling pretty good about it, I was like, I rang my dad and said, "Can you get this guy's number?" And he did, and so I just rang him up out of the blue and said, "Can I come down to your studio with my work?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, of course." I found out later he was like, "Oh my god!" So I drove. It was only, he was living quite near me, so it was only sort of 20 minutes. I drove down to his studio and showed him these 8 pages, and he was like, "Oh yeah, you should do this. If you show people this, you'll get work," which was, it's a profoundly simple thing for someone to say to you when you're, I think at the time I was working on a farm, and it's like, okay, I could do this, because the winter was coming, and you don't want to be out in the fields in the winter, and so he didn't put me in touch with anyone or say, "Oh, you should speak to so and so." He said, "Go to a comic book convention because there'll be editors there. You show them the work, and you'll be fine." So it's the Bristol Comic Convention a couple of months later, and sure enough, there were editors there, and so I was showing my portfolio to these different editors, and people kind of give you notes and say, "This is a bit rough around the edges. This is you should work on this," or "Get out of here, kid," that kind of thing. But in the 8 pages I was showing, there was a sequence in which someone there's like a stealth attack. A woman comes up behind a guy and kind of stabs him and takes his gun. And anyway, some of the people I was showing it to were designing video game art and box art and things, and they wanted a comic book to go with a video game they were working on. It's called Splinter Cell, which my understanding now is that game involves a lot of sneaking up behind people and stabbing them and taking their gun. So what happened was that they saw the image that they needed to see in their comic, and they saw it in my work, and that actually becomes a pattern that if you want to draw a horror comic, but you've only got kind of your Sonic the Hedgehog pages, it's not going to work in your favour.
Right.
And it's one of those things where people always tell you be careful what job you take, because there's a fair chance you're going to carry that forward with you. If if you just need to make some money, I'll go and be a waiter or something, then your next job, when you next need to make some money, you're probably going to be a waiter again, and so on. But it that sort of literalism carries on into comic book editors as well. They're like, "Oh, you've drawn a muscular dude punching another dude in the face. Here's the Hulk." You can't underestimate people's need to employ someone who's actually done the thing that they need.
Yeah, it's about the products, isn't it? Essentially.
Yeah, and if you've shown that you can already do it, then you're much more likely to get that job. So you should, in that sense, you should always kind of try and draw the thing you want to draw.
Okay, cool. Let's move on to this next one. So, is this still Splinter Cell?
Yeah. So this is more from Splinter Cell. I mean, it was terrible deadlines as well, and this is the thing you find out fairly early on. I think I had to draw 30 pages in about 30 days.
Wow.
In colour as well. I don't know.
I
don't work that fast at all now. It was terrible. No one should do that.
Okay. I mean, as a first job, was it? I mean, was it well paid, or did you get the job and think, wow, this is good money, or was it just awful?
It was good money.
Right.
It was really well paid. It's better paid than a lot of jobs I've done since.
Right. And is that because it was linked to a computer game? Do you think?
Yeah, I think it's Ubisoft. You know, they don't know how much they would be horrified if they found out how little comic book artists earned. They had no idea. They were like, they have all this money, and okay, fine, good.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So this takes us into, I think this is Torchwood, right?
Yeah.
So this was a kind of spin-off of Doctor Who, right?
Yeah. And so there's a long-running Doctor Who magazine, and I think when the Torchwood show was on, they started up a magazine for it as well, and it was sort of kind of articles and interviews, and then there would be these short stories. So these were basically kind of spot illustrations for those stories. And it was I think it was really badly paid. And I was working in a bookshop at the time, and I would occasionally have to phone in sick at the bookshop to hit the deadlines, because they were so tight.
So that's interesting, isn't it? So we're talking about Splinter Cell a minute ago, which is linked to a computer games industry, but then Doctor Who's linked to the BBC, and yet the BBC is lower paid.
Yeah, but I don't think. I mean, I think Titan, who published the magazine, I think they license it from the BBC.
Right.
So I think the BBC would do approval, but they would do approval on the images, not our paltry wages.
Right. Okay. Right. And can I just ask now? So I'm assuming that during this period of your life, you're using ink, right? Yeah. So what kind of materials are you using here?
Yeah. So it's like India ink and dip pens and sable brushes on paper. And you can, if you go on YouTube, and you can find kind of a lot of videos about materials, and people do tend to gravitate towards the same things, towards sable brushes, because they form nice points, and Japanese nib dip pens because they're consistent. And readily available, and then the colour is done in Photoshop.
Okay, right. So I was going back to your art college days there, and I was about to talk about Rembrandt, and I was just looking at this orange glow, and I was wondering whether, in what order you work, because Rembrandt used to start with the orange, and then work out from the glow, if you know what I mean. So I'm just wondering whether the brighter colours you kind of work backwards in that way, or whether they hit their highlights or their tints at the end.
It's my process of colouring is I think of it as scientific, but that's possibly erroneous. So, but there's a great TV series called Visions of Light, which is about cinematography, and there's a particular episode of that. I think it's from the 80s. It's quite old now, but there's an episode where they talk about Jack Cardiff and his work on the Powell and Pressburger films, like Black Narcissus and the Red Shoes and A Matter of Life and Death, although I don't think he photographed that one. But anyway, Black Narcissus is a film about a sort of convent in, I think it's in India, but it's all shot on like Elstree kind of soundstage, and so they had to try and generate that sense of kind of deep, rich blue skies and kind of dense air, and that sense of light that you get in India. And Jack Cardiff basically talked about how they just did it in the most rational way possible. They would kind of put all blue lights up in the sky, and then they would have strong, kind of super strong lights coming in for the sun, and then they would bounce these lights around the corners. Basically, just recreating the world of light as much as possible, and it's kind of a revelation when you see the imagery from the film. It's worth a Google, because it's a spectacular looking film, and it doesn't look like reality per se. It doesn't look like they're in India, but it is really beautiful, and it is really rich and textured. So I think it's really important when you're colouring to create a whole world, to imagine a new world, and for that to be, as kind of have as many facets as you can kind of bring into it, which is quite a lot of highfalutin talk for some sort of like blue and orange that I've put on this image.
But essentially, through colour, you're creating drama.
Yeah, you're creating drama, but in order to kind of fulfill, in order to get to the point of drama, first you've got to deal with reality. You've got to kind of figure out how to portray, the actuality of a rainy day. You have to kind of figure that out. Otherwise, the drama of what's happening in the moment, in the narrative, will be lost if you haven't sold the image.
So do you think, say for example, you were. So is it beneficial to say, if there was a big full moon out, for example, do you often sort of stand there and think about how that light falls off the moon and it hits the surface? Did you often think about those moments of drama in real life? Or
absolutely, yeah. And we're down here by the sea, and whenever I walk by the sea, I try and figure out what the rationale of it is. Why is the sea the colour it is today? It's kind of flummoxing, really, but it's as kind of, if you want to be in the business of kind of selling your visuals in a certain way, then you have to attend to these things.
So you must be in a constant state of analysis all the time, right? Just walking around, because there must be things that really fascinate you all the time. Right?
But I think as artists, we're all like that.
Well, you should be, right?
Yeah, you hope so.
Okay, I think that's a good time to move on to the next one. Okay, so I love this work. So you started working at 2000 AD, which must have been a great gig for you.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And I particularly love this work because this was a is it fair to call it homoerotic or homosexual portrayal of Judge Dredd, right?
Yeah, it's gay Dredd. And the I think the editor at 2008 sent me through the script, and I was kind of thrilled at the idea of drawing some Judge Dredd. And when I got the script, I was like, wait, no, what? And because there's a part of Judge Dredd that it's. Well, I think there's two different ways to read Judge Dredd. As a sort of satire of fascism, a political satire, but it's also, I think, it also works in sort of kind of blokish, cathartic violence. And there's part of me that kind of might have enjoyed drawing that, for better or worse. So when I got the script, I was like, wait, what is this? And then I read it again because because this is from page 1, and page 1 ends with Judge Dredd kissing the perp he was arresting, and then the story develops on from there.
Should we just look at the next slide?
Yeah, the next slide kind of explains what's going on.
Yeah.
Okay. So the story actually is revealed on page 2 that it's taking place in a gay nightclub, which is a kind of, the club is a kind of homage to the kind of the toughest man in leather in Mega City 1, to Judge Dredd, and so and the story is actually about a young gay man who's pictured left who's sort of coming to terms with his sexuality, and while in the world of Judge Dredd homosexuality isn't illegal, it can still be problematic. We can see down in the bottom right his father, and basically his dad is not into it, and so he has to face all the problems, a lot of the problems that gay people of any age have to face.
So we've spoken before about how influential 1980s action heroes were to you, especially we've spoken about Arnie films and RoboCop especially.
Yeah.
So Judge Dredd must have been a dream come true for you, right? Because you'd been so inspired by a lot of those those films, right?
Yeah, big time. But I don't know if I told you this before, but when I first spoke to the editor of 2000 AD and I showed him my work, he said, well, it's very stylized. I don't think it would be good for, say, Judge Dredd. And he didn't realise that he was breaking my heart as he was saying that. He didn't see the tear roll down my cheek. Probably at that point I was thinking, all right, okay, how do I draw? So they let me draw Judge Dredd. But it's hard to push those things, and it did actually just come about organically. But it's that may have been at the time my sole ambition when I was about a year or two into drawing comics, was to draw Judge Dredd. That was the limit of what I wanted to do, really.
Yeah, wow. What was the feedback from this? Because I imagine a lot of 2000 AD fans would have had a bit of a freak out about this story, right?
Well, that was the idea, because the subscribers get their copy every Wednesday morning, and the idea was that they'd be kind of spewing their tea across the kitchen table as they opened it up. It is a bit provocative, and the writer Rob Williams, he's one of the sort of regular Judge Dredd writers, and he did want to prod the more complacent readers, because there's a lot. It's a weird audience for 2000 AD. There's a lot of people who've been reading it since the 80s or even since the 70s. So it's the writers. I think the writers can get into a rut. And the readers can get into a rut as well, and everyone can just go along kind of safely telling the same old kind of versions of Judge Dredd and his world.
But he's never revealed his sexuality, though, is he, Judge Dredd? I mean, he's not like...
Oh, but he's married to the law, Lee.
Okay, all right.
But that leads us on to a more complicated take on Judge Dredd's world.
So this is Judge Anderson, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if she was explicitly created to be a counterpoint to Judge Dredd, but she is an empath, so she's kind of a bit of a mind reader, and she's sensitive, and despite working within the strictures of a fascist system, she's always kind of pushing back against it. And so this was one of the first long kind of form stories I drew. I think it was about 70 pages.
I can see Ridley Scott in this.
Oh, big time! Yeah. I mean, yeah. I wanted to channel Mobius, the French comic book artist, and but also Ridley Scott and Paul Verhoeven. Try and bring some of that cinema to it.
Should we look at the next one while we're here?
Yeah. And so this was drawing Anderson. Was it? This particular story was to do with child trafficking, and it sort of it creates an incredible sort of heavy toll upon Anderson because of her empathetic nature. And so it deals with kind of ideas of suicide and just kind of the overload of Judge Dredd's world, whereas a character like Judge Dredd just kind of blithely just kind of walks through it, hitting people on the head with his nightstick. So this is the complete other side of it in a way.
So I want to go back to something we spoke about earlier about figurative drawing. Okay, so how do you resolve anatomical problems with your characters here? I just remembered, you know what, there was one amazing morning, you probably won't remember this, but it was an afternoon where we just bumped into each other and you looked really stressed out, and I said, "You all right?" And you said, "No, I've spent the whole day trying to draw the bottom of a chin." and I never forgot that, and I just thought, wow, that's really difficult. So I'm just wondering how you, because a lot of the things, maybe we'll go to the next one as well, just maybe this will, I look, there's a chin here, for example. How do you overcome a lot of these problems with the figure?
It's really hard. I mean, and I think hard for me, and I think the problems I have with it, it's how you resolve your visual language. Okay, so in this case, it's sort of essentially line and colour. So how do you resolve that with the three-dimensional world, or trying to represent three-dimensional world? So if somebody's tilting their head back, there aren't any specific contours that you might draw. If, this is getting into the weeds a bit with drawing, but if you think of like contour drawing as every time a form turns a corner, you put a line in there. Mm-hmm. If someone lifts their head up, you're looking under their chin, you're just not getting a sequence of contours. You're just getting almost like a sort of S curve of shapes that I don't, and you're like, well, how do I draw this? I don't know. It's, and I'm sure, I still don't know. And that was probably two years ago when I was walking down the street with a furrowed brow.
But surely as well, you have to, when you're, it's not just about the figure, isn't it? It's like, like for example, in this piece, there's a specific light that is coming through a specific window, and it's illuminating this space in a specific way. So there has to be a consistency to that, doesn't it? Through the narrative, the figure has to move through this, and if they come in at one point and they get to the lighter part of the room, then all of those things need to matter, don't they?
Yes, yes, exactly. And it's I think if you work in collaborative mediums like film and TV, those jobs tend to get dispersed. But with something like this, I'm the director, I'm the actors, I'm the cinematographer, all of these things. So like in the bottom right hand panel, it's literally this I think it was done in 10. The story is broken into 7 10-page parts, and so this particular story, this particular 10-page sequence takes place over one day. So now we're moving into the evening, and so I wanted to get that kind of dusky light, and then as she's walking through this concourse, and then she comes into this room, which the windows are facing the sun side, as it were, and the light's falling across the side of this guy's head. But it's what I was saying earlier about a rationale, like a kind of, I mean, scientific's not really the word for it, but a rational approach to it. It seems really important that I figured out that this story, this particular 10 pages, would start at sunrise and end at sunset, and then that would create like an ellipse for it, like visually, even if it's not something that the reader would be aware of, but hopefully it adds to a sense of conviction, that their conviction for the reader that the story takes place in the real world and in real time.
Well, yeah, and it's about how you organise the sequence of things, isn't it? And how you you drag the viewer into that space, and the way that you depict time is not only through a figure moving, is it? It's about light. It's about the elements. It's about all kinds of things, and that needs to come across in the drawing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
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 Amazing.
It's one of those things. If you think about it, then it starts to inform your decisions kind of instinctively, because you want to fulfill that sense of place and that sense of moment, and then it becomes part of storytelling.
Yeah. I mean, in that sense, you're. I just got thinking about somebody. I was talking to somebody that designs, plays and stuff, and they once said, I thought maybe they were talking about. Who were they talking about? What's the guy called? Just completely forgotten his name. The dude.
That guy.
I can't believe I've just forgotten his name. Who's the guy that said, fail better, fail again? Amazing playwright. Did the
Arthur Miller?
No. Did Godot? Waiting for Godot.
Oh yeah. That guy.
God, I can't remember his name. Oh yeah, that's going to drive me crazy.
Yeah. Samuel Beckett.
Samuel Beckett, yeah. So Samuel Beckett was talking about. I was talking to this person about Samuel Beckett, and they were saying that he said something about the stage not announcing itself. That the characters just do their thing on the stage, but the stage doesn't announce itself. But so it has this kind of incredible presence about it, but it doesn't shout it.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely crucial and essential to the whole sequence and behaviour of that figure.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I find fascinating about these images is that the backgrounds don't announce themselves in any. They're quite quiet, aren't they? They are sort of definitely in the background. But however good your figurative drawing is, if you haven't got that light and you haven't got that time, the whole thing just falls apart, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's I've talked to people who don't want to draw buildings and cars and fire escapes and things. They just want to draw characters because it's very compelling to draw people, and it's a different compulsion to want to draw spaces and things. But I think you have to address the totality if you want to. It's a question of sensibility, perhaps. For me, it's important to have all of it on the page.
Do you like drawing guns?
No, I don't like drawing guns, cars, anything man-made, because it all has to fit together perfectly.
Right.
If you have to draw a car, you have to draw an actual car. It's,
right.
So it's just tiresome.
Okay. Okay, so where are we now? What's this?
All right. So after Judge Anderson, I was still kind of busy at 2000 AD, and so this was a postmodern cowboy comic, western, if you will. Again, written by Rob Williams, who wrote the Gay Dredd story, and this was a black and white book. Which was really intimidating for me because in the Anderson book I was just putting down thin lines and letting all the accumulated all the accumulated thinking I'd done at art school, working from the model and thinking about light and colour, and letting that do the heavy lifting. Letting that carry the book. And letting it take up the slack of some of the bad drawing. And so I really wanted to do this book, but I was very apprehensive about not having that kind of tool at my disposal, about having to just go into black and white.
And this was with ink, right?
Yeah, it's all pen on paper. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But it's, I think it's good to I always try and I've been very much learning on the job the whole time. I mean, like I said, I hadn't even finished the comic for my friend's film before I got my first job.
Yeah.
And so it's all learning on the job, and I think I've sort of carried that through, as in I accepted this job, but I had no idea if I could do it or not. But it was. And it was ups and downs. Sometimes it was all right, and sometimes it wasn't. There's a lot of horse drawing in this one, and it's like that's like a joke with comic book artists. If you have to draw something with horses in it, there's just.
In the top 5 hardest thing to draw, aren't they, horses?
Yeah, top 3, I'd say. They're the worst.
Yeah.
And I found an app called Horse Pose Tool. And so each kind of joint of the horse, you can kind of click on it and manipulate it.
Right.
Which you think, oh, hey, great! I can use this horse, this virtual horse. I can just take screen grabs of it and just copy it onto the paper. It's going to be great. But you quickly realise that horses have fetlocks and forelocks, and do you know how that they move? Because it turns out it's really complicated. There's like 6 different parts to their legs, and they move in a very unique and specific way. And if you start kind of bending them the wrong way, oh my god, it looks terrible. Yeah. So horse pose tool, it's amazing, but you need to know how a horse moves.
But that's. I mean, you do that to get paid. I mean, I think. We'd call it research at university, but it's essentially what it is, isn't it? It's knowing your stuff, isn't it?
Yes, that's it. You have to dive down that kind of rabbit hole because it's your responsibility to kind of render these things out as well as you can.
Yeah.
So so you can't just accept that horses are difficult. You have to you have to bite the bit. Appropriate metaphor.
Okay. All right.
So this is some process.
Okay. So what? So this was. I'm going to sort of ask you some technical questions here. So what paper would you start off with something like this?
Okay. So I've actually skipped a little bit of the process here, I'm afraid. But so the first thing I would do would be do a little thumbnail. Just on a piece of regular A4 paper. So the script would say, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, say 7 panels. Panel 1, a hand brushing, in a cornfield, and then a wider shot of our protagonist kind of staring into the distance. And then the shot of what he's staring at, this house, and so on. And so you build up a little rough sketch of how you're going to organise the page based upon the script. And then once that's kind of nailed down, then the sort of standard material for drawing comics is a kind of paper called Bristol board. And Dale Rowney and Winsor and Newton make their versions of it. The better versions come from America, made by a company called Strathmore. The Winsor and the Dale and Rowney ones tend to bleed a bit with certain inks, which is frustrating. I would think. I mean, you can get more and more Japanese materials here now, and for the and it's such a big industry in Japan that nearly all the materials are really good. So it might be, that's probably something to think about now. It's been a couple of years since I've drawn on paper, but the Strathmore Bristol was always nice.
Wow.
And then I'd just be drawing with just a regular pencil.
And was that like a technical thing, or was that an expectation as well? I mean, was it that clients would expect it to be like that?
No. I mean, all the client cares about is the kind of 300 DPI TIFF that you send them.
Right. Okay.
You know, so however you get there, that's up to you. And then, you know, I should have mentioned early on that before that, sort of in my 20s, I would try and draw comic books. Or I'd try and draw a comic book page, but I would draw it actual size. And this is a common thing. I've heard Charlie Brooker talk about this as well. That he was trying to draw 3 panel strips for his local newspaper, but he was drawing them the size that they're printed at, which, you know, is impossible. And you just kind of go crazy just trying to draw these, you know, everything for print is so much easier if you draw it size and a half or double size. I mean, comics, the classic American comics from the Golden Age were generally drawn double size. So this is huge, larger than A3 pieces of paper. Typically now it's size and a half, so it's around A3 size. To print something that is, you know, smaller than A4. But it's a sort of tried and tested approach. But yeah, and now that kind of information is quite readily available. I feel like it's showing my age that it was not readily available when I started out.
I might move through some of these so we can move on to some new works. I'm quite conscious of the time.
Sure.
So, but here we see this move into you inking it, right?
Yep.
And then we move into the colour work.
Yeah.
So again, at this point, you're still using physical materials, right?
Yeah, physical materials, but then just the colour is done in Photoshop.
Okay.
And so that was part of the meta nature of this story, that we would that it was set in the afterlife. But when Ichabod returned to reality, and when he started from reality, it was actually that reality was in colour. And then during the comic, certain moments of reality would kind of, or he would dream of his reality, and they would come in as colour elements.
Like the opposite to Wizard of Oz, really.
Yeah. But you know, but also completely stealing from it.
Okay. All right. So. Okay. So this is interesting, isn't it? So, we got talking about Squid Game, and you sort of did Squid Game before Squid Game, didn't you?
Yeah, this was our Squid Game, and this was our kind of battle royale. It was a book called Unfollow that I did with Rob Williams. But this time we did this with Vertigo, which is an imprint of DC Comics. And Vertigo was sort of famous for kind of spearheading adult comics, possibly. And so in their early line, they had Alamore's Swamp Thing, and then they went on with books like Sandman by Neil Gaiman.
Who's the angel guy? Constantine.
And then Hellblazer, which was the John Constantine book, which were books I read, when I was a sort of teenager and starting to feel the sort of the weight of pretentiousness settle upon me, and it was so to go and work for them was great. And this was also a creator-owned book, so this was an idea that Rob Williams and myself came up with in a bar in Leeds, because I was kind of obsessed with survival stories and hunt stories and the deadliest game, kind of man hunting man, Rambo, and I was basically, we should do a story like this, and Rob's kind of genius was to bring in social media into it. and so his idea was that it would be this kind of social media tycoon who's going to leave all his money to a kind of a random selection of essentially his Twitter users. It's kind of, he's going to leave his billions, but then from the beginning, people within that mechanism are working to bring the numbers down, to bring that 140. He's going to leave it to 140 people, but as those people meet their kind of untimely ends, the share grows larger for the other people. Actually, it's been a while. I might not be explaining this the best. So it ends up becoming something of a free for all as kind of bad elements enter this game to try and increase their share of this dying tycoon's fortune.
So, when you and Rob were thinking about this, I mean, how does that work? So do you need to just get on with it and make it and then pitch it, or was there a contract involved beforehand?
Well, I think after discussing it in the pub, we then discussed it in a more sober manner over a couple of months until we had quite a solid idea of what it was, which was then kind of reduced down to just a 2-page pitch plus I think I might have done a couple of drawings to reinforce the pitch, and I think there was also a character breakdown of some of the main characters and their kind of how they would work within the story. And I think that's fairly standard for pitching to comic book companies.
And so you pitch it, and then what happens? They believe in what you do, and then they offer you a fee, or
well, I think what they essentially said was, yes, we're into it, but then at that point they start saying, well, how about instead of a film about a dog that's escaped a research laboratory, how about it's a film about a cat that learns to talk or something? Like, well, that's not what we it's the kind of classic Hollywood thing where you're like, oh my god, they've ruined my idea, and why are we doing this? And then everyone after 3 months everyone walks away unhappy, or they make minor changes. And I think with this book, initially the protagonist was a middle-aged white man. And our editor thoughtfully pointed out that there's probably enough middle-aged white protagonists.
Right. Okay.
And that was a note that both myself and Rob were more than happy to take on.
Yeah.
Somewhat shamefacedly.
So we can go to this one as well, right? Yeah. These are all the drawings for that.
So these, and it's basically the first issue was the drawing together of the major characters, and they were all introduced in their environment. So, and here we're in that sequence we were meeting a Japanese author, and now we're kind of somewhat later in the story, and it's somewhat of a change in approach to the story as the numbers of survivors came down, and it became more and more desperate. The story became the art became starker, more black, and gradually, as we sort of come to the end, it becomes sort of more and more kind of frenetic and desperate. I mean, the deadlines are quite tight, which kind of informed that. But I think I quite like the fact that it added a kind of energy to it, And because by the end, I was in the studio 6 days a week, kind of 9-10 hours a day, and was starting to feel pretty burnt out. But Rob, was like, "This is great. Keep going, keep going." I'm like, okay.
Okay, so we're on to something new now. So, okay, so where are we? We're still using pens, right?
Yeah. Well, brushes.
Brushes,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This was drawn primarily with a sable brush.
Okay.
And a number 2 Kalinsky sable for those who are interested. And then again, colours in Photoshop, which is getting to the point, I think, where the colour is somewhat obscuring the drawing. It's actually quite hard to see the line art. But yeah, and this is from a book called Safe Sex, which was also for Vertigo.
But there were problems with this book, right?
Yeah, we did have problems getting this book going.
And this is written by Rob Williams again, right?
No, this is written by a woman called Tina Horn, who is a podcaster and journalist and sometime pornographer. And she wanted to do a book, like a sort of dystopian science fiction piece about the removal of sexual freedom, and so she got in touch with Vertigo, and then they got in touch with me and asked if I'd be interested in working with Tina. So on this book, and so I was, knowing that it would be a fairly explicit book, I knew that I had to make sure that Tina was kind of on the level of this. But so I read some of her articles and I listened to some of her podcasts, because I think you have to be careful if you're an artist and you're kind of moving into realms which are not your own. As a straight white man, I was, I had the feeling I had to trust. I wouldn't necessarily know this world, but I had to trust that Tina knew this world and could do it kind of, and could honour these characters. And it was, kind of delving into her work and then speaking to her in person. It was apparent that this is the world that she knows, and that my job was to just kind of illustrate as best I can, what this kind of unique knowledge that she was bringing. And for me, it's really interesting to draw a story basically with a lot of gay and trans characters, people that aren't generally get to be the protagonists of comic books, and it's and it did seem like a very worthwhile thing to do. But as we progressed with the book, and we were both just working on it in sort of pre-production, essentially. It hadn't gone to print, but we were getting more and more notes from high up the editorial chain to sort of rein in the imagery. But weirdly, the notes got sort of less and less coherent and harder to follow. Where you're dealing with quite a large corporate entity with sort of DC and Warner Brothers, and it becomes sort of bewildering, really. And the notes aren't then coming from specific people; they're just sort of floating in at you from your editor, who's not kind of, there's no one you can argue with per se. There's no one you can say, "Oh no, it's important that we do this." It became very one-sided and very difficult to keep going with the book, really. And eventually we I spoke to Tina and we were both like, yeah, I think it's not going to happen. And I think we were about 3 issues in at that point. We had 3 finished issues, and we were like, yeah, we both knew that it was like, I was like, okay, I'm going to start looking for another job, but we'll get back to this.
Yeah. It did get published, didn't it? I've seen it.
Yes, it did. It did. In the end, Vertigo DC did kind of back away from it. But Image Comics were more than happy to take it on. And so I finished the issues that I worked on, and we got it into print. Yeah, it's
cool.
Great.
Okay, so where are we now with this one?
Okay, so that's more safe sex.
Okay. All right. Would it be okay, just because I know I can just feel that an hour in, I've got some students go, "Where's the Marvel stuff?"
Yeah, where's Thor and his hammer?
Okay, so to the relief of a lot of students, I imagine we can go into this next phase now. So I can remember a snowy day at the top of a hill when I was with my kids, and I watched you come up the hill with your kids with the sledges, and you going, Lee. And I thought, he must be really excited because of the snow.
I do love snow.
And when you arrived, it wasn't the snow; it was the fact that you'd just drawn your first picture of Spider-Man for Marvel. Yeah. And it was so exciting. I was so excited to have seen it. I think maybe I was more excited than you were. Just the association of you being there and having done it. So this is like a dream come true, right? Isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's when I was a kid. I mean, it's different now, but when I was a kid, you could find Marvel comic books just in your local newsagent. They would have like a spinner, and they would and so down the side of my parents' sofa there was a sort of magazine rack, and if you kind of lifted the Littlewoods catalogue out of the way, underneath there was sort of copies of classic Spider-Man comics all kind of stuffed in there, and they'd always be pulled out and read again, and it became sort of part of the sort of pantheon of things to do in my head. It was like to Judge Dredd. Obviously, that was the limit of my ambition initially. But once I'd drawn Judge Dredd, I started thinking, well, maybe I could draw Spider-Man. maybe and it's kind of fulfilling childhood ambitions, but at the same time you try to bring an adult level of sophistication to it. But and in a lot of ways it's actually more satisfying to draw Black Cat, to draw her character, Felicia Hardy, because she's a bit new. In a way, although she's been around for a long time, to me she's a bit fresher and more. You can do more things possibly with her, and there's a kind of danger in drawing Spider-Man that you could just it's just a thing that you liked when you were a kid, and then as an adult, you're just like, what am I doing? I'm drawing kind of a dumb kid's book. What is this what I wanted to do?
But the Black Cat, she's got some similarities to Catwoman, isn't she? And that sort of relationship between Peter Parker and her. There's some parallels there with Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because I do remember there was some sort of romance, wasn't there, between her and Peter Parker?
Oh yeah, big time. Yeah, and it's I mean, she is, as much as it's like with Judge Dredd and Judge Anderson that they present different sides of the same kind of doing the same job. And it's the same with Black Cat, Spiderman. You know,
Yeah,
she's kind of a superhero, but she's also a bit of a jewel thief, and you know, is in that grey area really. But it was interesting to me about her, the way she's written for this particular book that I was drawing, is that she was presented as, you know, as a very three-dimensional character, and you know, she it was Jed McKay who was the writer, and I think he was doing a great job at making her feel like a well-rounded kind of individual, you know, which I think it's hard to make superheroes feel like that, you know, because you have so much kind of knowledge of them, or they're so archetypical, you know.
I'd like to ask. I'm looking at this image. Do you ever think you've got better? Because you've been doing it a long time, right? And do you think that the work's improved?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I hope so.
I think it has. I mean, I think it was.
I mean, the first images are sort of very rough around the edges, and I resisted the urge to kind of apologise profusely for them.
Well, no, I thought the first images were great, but I mean, it must be, you must be getting to a point where you think, you know what, I've been doing this for such a long time now that I've got really good at this, you know, because this is great stuff, right? So, but it's taken a lot of time, isn't it, and a lot of practice and a lot of commitment, you know.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff to learn, you know, like anatomy and perspective, you know, things which, although, you know, when I was at art school, you know, I was thinking about observational things. I wasn't thinking about those things because I was thinking about painting the air in front of me, if you will, rather than the forms themselves. And,
so I imagine a lot of students are going to be thinking, what is it like to work for Marvel? Because, you know, Marvel isn't the Marvel that we knew when we were young, right? So Marvel now has a completely different presence than it did when we were buying comics from the newsagents, you know.
Yeah.
We've got the MCU.
Yeah.
We've got loads of kind of spin-off stuff with Disney, and the graphic novels are far more engaging than they ever were. So what's it like to be part of that world?
Well, I mean, it's very... I mean, I think... Yeah, when I was reading Marvel Comics, I didn't know it at the time, but they were on the verge of bankruptcy. One of the reasons that they don't own Spider-Man wholly is because they had to sell him to Sony, sell the movie option to Sony to keep their comics business afloat. But there's now this great awareness of the Marvel universe, but it is mostly focused on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Comic book sales are down. I mean, in the last few years, they are gradually rising, and particularly graphic novel sales, or, you know, the collected editions. But they're still quite far down on what they were 20 years ago. It's a weird value proposition, right? I mean, comic book would be £3 or £4 just for a comic, which it's not much less than a Netflix subscription, you know. So you think about what you're getting for, you know, this similar money. They're weird objects, you know. They're hard things to sell, and unfortunately, you know, you can be drawing a Spider-Man comic when a Spider-Man film comes out, and the bump is not big, you know. There's a little bit, but essentially the sales mean that it's a fairly meager industry. It's not a license to print cash, you know, running a comic book company.
And I suppose as well, the way people buy comics is very different now. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that when we were young, it was all about a subscription, or you would run down to your local newsagents and buy it every month or every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
but now there's a market online. There's also, you're more likely to go into Forbidden Planet or Waterstones and buy a graphic novel for 15 quid.
Yeah.
Than you are to buy a subscription to Batman every month, aren't you?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's where the sales figures are trending. You're more likely to read it digitally. And I think that despite the kind of cultural presence of Marvel and DC, obviously, manga continues to kind of outstrip it in sales, and of course, the digital comics are a whole other proposition, which I think it shows up all the problems of buying a print object for £4 each month. It's a very difficult proposition.
You know what though? I mean, the thing that's evident though is that, however amazing the MCU is, and I'm a big fan, and the magic started with drawing, and I think the magic is always in drawing. None of those films would be anything if it wasn't for drawing. And I think drawing takes you places that cinema can't. And it starts there, doesn't it? You know, always.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think all visual people, when they are trying to resolve an idea, the first thing you do is you grab a piece of paper, right? I mean, whether you're a filmmaker or an animator, a painter, you need to start putting marks down to kind of to think your way through it. You can't settle those issues without kind of seeing how they evolve as drawings.
These are available, aren't they? They're published. They're on. You can buy them now.
Yeah.
I've seen them. They're readily available, aren't they?
Yeah, I believe that this issue of Spider-Man comes out in the middle of November, which is when we're recording this.
And the Black Cat series, that's out, isn't it? Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah,
it's on my Christmas list. Okay, so this is Spidey.
Yeah.
That must have been a moment, right?
To be sort of given the keys to the big car is it's pretty nice, and it's and honestly, I didn't know what to expect, but as soon as I read the script, it was full of kind of, it had soapy melodrama, it had sort of monologuing villains, kind of explosions, and swinging through New York. Essentially, everything I remember about Spider-Man as a kid. It's.
So here's a big question. So when you got that gig, when you first got that gig, who were the first people you wanted to tell?
Well, I remember telling my kids, and they just kind of stared at me. It was like, actually, my youngest said to me, "I drew Spider-Man yesterday," which he had indeed done.
And I imagine you drew it really well.
Oh, really well, yeah.
Yeah.
But see, it's. I remember telling my brother, because we had a kind of shared love of comics when we were kids, and it's and that's it's just one of those things that's really nice about drawing comics is to be able to kind of like talking to my brother about it. It's like, we had such a kind of a shared interest in these things. I mean, he wears a suit for what he does now, but it's just that nice thing of like he would know how much this would mean to me. And
he's such an interesting character, isn't he? I mean, we were talking about Judge Dredd earlier, and Spidey and Peter, the whole thing about Peter Parker, all of his vulnerabilities are completely exposed all the time, aren't they?
Yeah.
That's the thing about Spidey, is that all of his private life is just on the washing line, isn't it?
He's a raw nerve. Poor Spider-Man. Poor Peter Parker. Yeah.
There's no hidden secrets there.
No.
Or you're not like Judge Dredd. You're trying to imagine if he's gay,
or if he has a weakness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Spider-Man is all out there, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And that was kind of Marvel. That was Marvel's great kind of innovation over DC. Was giving people these kind of inner lives, but Batman didn't really have much of an inner life, and Superman was Superman, Clark Kent was just a disguise, whereas Spider-Man's really Peter Parker, he's just a kind of kid who's trying to figure things out, and his origin story is basically him getting it wrong. He's not understanding what his responsibilities are. And then the weight of that constantly pushes him forwards.
So here you're this is digital, right?
Yeah, all digital now. When I started drawing Black Cat, I bought one of those big Wacom screens, which are really expensive, and a weird kind of investment to make, because you don't know. I think as a practitioner, you don't know if it's going to work for you or not. But they're sort of. But they enable a more stream of consciousness kind of approach, because as you draw and as you ink, you don't have to worry about making absolute statements, because you can always kind of rethink your process, even at the last minute. Which, when you're working with India ink, the Tipex just will only go so far. You can only make so many corrections. Before you've kind of lost the shape of it. Whereas once you're working digitally, black and white are the same medium. You can kind of push and pull the image. I mean, I think Mobius, the French comic book artist, was an early kind of adopter of digital process, because of that very freedom to constantly rephrase your thought, your visual thought, to try and kind of perhaps sneak up upon the conclusion, the conclusive image.
Okay, so I hope and pray that the MCU do something with Kraven the Hunter. He's one of my favourite villains.
He's great.
This is the last slide, but I think what I'm going to do is on the last slide, I'm going to ask some student questions that I've got with me. So if you students are still listening, I've gone a little bit over. I'm sorry. I was going to keep it to an hour. I've gone 18 minutes over. I'm sorry. So I've highlighted not every question you've asked me to ask, because I think we've gone through a lot of it already. But this is from Rihanna Chambers. Hello, Rihanna.
Hey, Rihanna.
So Rihanna's asking, do you find working with the deadlines for comics stressful?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is the perfect question, Rihanna, because it's at the moment, I've just moved. I'm in the middle of moving house. I have a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. And even if I didn't have these things going on in my life, I would find the deadlines stressful, because you always want to make a good job of something, right? And you always, you don't want to leave an image until it's settled. but sometimes the deadlines won't allow that. Sometimes you just have to move on, and then you end up putting things out into the world which you'd much rather weren't out there, or sending things to your editors which you suspect might kind of limit your chances of getting more work in the future. Yeah, so that's the stress. Yes.
Okay, cool. So we got a question from Grace Sutanto. Hello, Grace.
Hey.
So you've got a lot of questions here, but I think I'm going to look at this one, which says, how do you deal with creative burnout or a creative block if you've ever had one?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I've never actually hit full burnout, but I've definitely sailed close to it. And the thing is, I mean, at some point you have to rely upon, the idea that even if it's not your best work, and you don't want to send it off, that it'll perhaps be, that in 6 months' time it'll be all right. Because I think in a lot of ways burnout is to do with, doubting your own work, and that creates such stress that it tires you out, and it becomes hard to carry on. So I think the main thing is to just maintain a certain amount of composure, even in the face of your own kind of failings. It's like I mean, you see it in composure is something they talk about in boxing. It's if you get kind of bopped on the nose, but you don't let on that you've been bopped on the nose, you might get away with it. The other guy might not continue to do it. He might take a step back for a minute.
It's interesting. It's a question I wanted to ask actually during the talk, was about. I kept wanting to come back to this thing about drawing the figure, and you watch a lot of fighting, don't you?
Yeah. I'm interested in mixed martial arts. It was something I used to do, karate and kung fu and things when I was a teenager, and I was always interested in the kind of. Yeah, and I think it's to do with comics. It's in some ways it's to do with physical things. It's to do with how you. And I was a skateboarder as well. And I wasn't a sports player per se, but I was always interested in doing physical things. And I think part of the joy of a character like Spider-Man is his physicality, right? I mean, just the way he moves through New York, I think is. It's just wonderful, I think.
Okay, so we've got Aisha. Hello, Aisha. So 2 questions really that are linked. So she says, what does your average day look like when working, and do you have anything on in the background whilst working, like an album or a show or movie? Well,
average day is getting into the studio as early as possible, should be sort of around between 8 and 9, and then I'll have kind of basically one of 3 things to do. I'll either be laying out a script, which is taking the kind of the written description and dialogue and kind of figuring out how to lay that out into the panels and the pages, or I'll be penciling, which is kind of tightening up those rough layouts, or I'll be inking. Today, for instance, I was just penciling today, and so I was just working on 2 different pages, which are connected pages, trying to make sure that they read clearly, and then that basically involved kind of grabbing kind of photo reference and things from the internet, taking photos of myself in strange poses, which I really need to turn off my iCloud. There's so many embarrassing images on there, and and then kind of trying to stitch it all together to make it look reasonable. And when I'm doing something like that, I might listen to some music because it's quite involved, and if I'm breaking down scripts into drawings, then I might not even listen to music because I just need to focus on really getting the storytelling right. But when I'm inking, I'll definitely listen to some music then, or I might listen to an audiobook, but nothing, no James Joyce or anything like that. It generally has to be, narrative kind of driven, something fairly easygoing.
Cool. All right, so this is from Lenny. Hi, Lenny. So I think we've covered some of the questions he's asked, but so he says, do you ever have time to doodle? What do you tend to draw when left to your own devices?
Yeah, I don't really doodle much at all. And it's funny because on Instagram I follow lots of other comic book artists, and you see their sketchbooks and their doodles and things, and at some point I started to feel a bit kind of like self-conscious or about it. It's like, I don't do anything. I don't do any kind of doodles because I'm in the studio like 8, 9, 10 hours a day, sometimes 6 days a week, and really it gets to the point where you have to rest your hand so you're not getting carpal tunnel and tennis elbow and things like that. And I was like, I really don't have time for it. But luckily I managed to speak to a couple of my peers, and they were like, oh yeah, I mean, I do my drawing in the books, that's where the energy needs to go. I will occasionally draw pictures of Spider-Man for my children, but they're not impressed.
Okay. So Victoria asked a question, which I think we've answered, about, could you please ask Michael about how he actually got into the comic book industry? We've sort of covered that. On what did he do before landing a job at Marvel? So sorry, Victoria, we've done that. So Kelly has asked, that's quite an interesting one. I'd like to know this. So maybe it's too big a question, but she said, who has been your biggest influence?
Yeah, man, that's a big Frank Miller.
Okay, all right, good answer.
Yeah, he's pretty good. He although he recently was gonna go to the Thought Bubble convention in Leeds, but he's not now. It's probably too much to go into at this time of the day. But it's worth a Google if anyone's interested.
We'll do this in the pub.
Yes.
Okay. And so I think we've answered one of the other questions, but this is a good question from Kelly. She said, do you ever feel the impulse not to draw?
No, I don't. I used to have a quite strong. I used to have a strong ambition to make a film, and I used to put sort of efforts into seeing how I could angle that, and who I could get to know who might help sort of facilitate that. But actually, that's kind of fallen by the wayside, and I think the more I draw, the more I feel that it's enough language for me. That it's the things I want to say, I think I can say in drawing.
Okay. So from Natalie, Natalie, you need to understand that your questions were an inspiration in my interviewing, so I've sort of asked a lot of these questions already.
Lee's nicked your questions.
I've nicked your questions. So we've answered those. Which art supplies do you prefer to use? We've looked at that, and tight deadlines. We've done that. So Leonardo, hello Leonardo. I was working with Leonardo today. We've asked that question about the opportunity to work with Marvel, and I suppose he's asking, how do you create connections, and maybe that's something you spoke about right at the beginning about making the right work for the right people. Yeah,
and making the right work for yourself.
Yeah,
like I think I think all the time you have to be aware of what it is that you want to do in the future. Where your ambitions are leading you, and let that inform what you're doing right now. Don't try and make things that people want, because it's what I was saying about, like, if you get a job as a waiter, then your next job you'll be a waiter. So draw the things you want to draw. There's a whole universe of comics out there now, and it's a much broader genre. It's a much broader medium now than ever before. So do the things you want to do, and that there is a market for it, and it will enable you then, as your work evolves, it will enable you to connect to the people who can understand what you're trying to achieve and help you achieve it.
Cool. So this is the last one. So this is from Radwan. So Radwan sent this email earlier, and I replied to him and said he's not going to answer that.
Yeah.
Because that's more MCU. But then I got back to Radwan and said, you know what, I'm going to ask him that because it's quite interesting. So this is from Radwan. He says, hi Lee, please could you ask him, as I'm a big Marvel fan. So his question is this. Yeah. You've got to concentrate on this. Yeah.
Sure.
Why couldn't Miss Marvel in Endgame do the snap instead of Tony? Because at least she wouldn't have died.
Well, exactly. She wouldn't have died.
Yeah.
You've answered your own question.
And then the next question. Can you also ask him, in Endgame, where Black Widow had died, why wasn't Worldbreaker Hulk introduced? Because it wouldn't have been that would have been the perfect opportunity. It's a good question, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it immediately makes me realise I don't know as much about the Marvel universe as Radwan does.
Okay, I'm sorry, Radwan. We haven't got the answers to that, but
I'm sure that is fair comment, though.
I think maybe you know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a good question.
I mean, possibly Worldbreaker, it's plot breaker, right? I mean, it's Deus Ex Hulk, I think, is...
Okay, I've gone way over time. It was meant to be an hour. It's an hour and a half. Sorry, everyone, but I'm not sorry as well, because I think we've heard some amazing stuff from Michael. So thank you so much, Michael, for this opportunity.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks, guys. I'm going to turn off now, and I'll see you at LCC. See you later.